Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the GSMC television podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Chad, and today we are going to continue my series on streaming platforms. If you listened to my last episode, you know that I read an article recently that was talking about ways that you could save money in 2021. And one of the kind of interesting suggestions that was made in that article was that you should only have one streaming service subscription at a time. Now, if you're like me and you watch a lot of television and you have multiple streaming services, I have 6, that is going to sound a little insane. But basically the premise of this suggestion was that, look, any streaming service you choose is going to have a variety of content. For the average TV watcher, they should have no problem for a period of time finding just pretty much something to watch. Especially with a lot of the sites having these recommendation technologies where you watch one thing and it recommends 3 other things. It's really easy to kind of continue finding things that are within your interest zone to view. This is kind of an interesting idea to me. And I started thinking about my streaming services and whether or not I actually use all of them each month. And just in all honesty, I don't. And so I started going, okay, well, if someone was going to tackle this, if someone's going to choose to only have one streaming service this month, which one would they choose? How would they go about choosing, especially given there's so many streaming services out there, we can't possibly know whether we'll like them or not. And so I figured, you know what? I have a podcast. And I have 6 streaming services. So if I do a podcast on each of the streaming services, I will be getting valuable information out into the world. And if you decide to use this suggestion as one of the ways to save some money in 2021, hopefully this will help you out. So last episode, I covered Paramount Plus and then talked about their kind of structure and pricing. User interface, and then I went into some of the shows that are available on that streaming platform. I'm going to do the same thing today, only I'm going to tackle the granddaddy of streaming services, the big poobah, Netflix. This is the streaming service that I've had the most. This is a streaming service that most people are familiar with. So I'm going to tackle Netflix today. And after I talk about the history of structure, user interface, then I'm going to go into some of the shows that I watch on Netflix. Specifically, I'm going to focus on cooking shows on Netflix because I watch a lot of the cooking shows. We're going to talk about Chef Show, Ugly Delicious, Crazy Delicious, and Waffles and Mochi. Waffles and Mochi, a new kids food show that is absolutely fabulous for adults as well as for kids. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Netflix, established in 1997 by Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph. The initial business model was based in the sale and rental of DVDs via mail. The sales part of the business was actually abandoned a year after they launched, and DVD rentals became the focus. But they were the first to kind of prescribe this subscription-based model to video rental via mail. Blockbuster had it, but not via mail. The founders of Netflix were ideally suited for this idea. So Hastings was actually a marketing director for a software company that he started called Pure Atria. He sold that software company in 1997 for $700 million. So you have this computer software designer engineer who now has come into a lot of money and is looking for ways to invest it. And then Randolph co-founded a mail order computer company. So much like any mail order catalog where you can get clothing and stuff like that, he had one, only it was for computers. And so Randolph was operating in this kind of mail order space, and he was interested and admired an up-and-coming e-commerce company at the time, Amazon. So back in 1997, if you kind of put yourself back there, if you were alive then, if not, well, then look it up. Computers and the internet were kind of, still in their beginning stages, right? So e-commerce was not really the thing that it is now. And so Amazon was kind of on the forefront of that as a fledgling company. So the two of them got together and they were talking, and they were kind of looking at what Amazon was doing and looking at the landscape and saying, hey, what could we do? And so what they decided was if they could identify one category of items to sell, something that was portable, easy to mail, that they could sell that online. And this was going to be kind of their similar model, but different from what Amazon was doing. So initially, they started looking at VHS tape rentals. So these are those kind of large cassette tapes that went in the old VHS players. And that was kind of the popular medium at the time for home viewing of movies. People would go to Blockbuster, they'd get a VHS, they take it home, they watch it, right? So they wanted to do that in the mail, and they scrapped that idea because what they were finding was, look, we're going to have a large volume of these tapes in supply to be able to mail them out. So storing them was going to be really expensive because of the size, the amount of space that a VHS tape takes up, and it was going to be just too difficult to ship because VHS tapes were a little bit delicate. Anybody who remembers that little flip-up cover on the front that covered the actual tape breaking when you accidentally dropped it, very fragile. So they kind of ruled that out. But they still were looking at this industry, this video rental industry, which in 1997 was a $16 billion a year industry. And so they were trying to think, how could they, break in there? As it turns out, a new technology, a new medium for watching movies was beginning to come into fruition in the U.S., and that was the DVD player. It was introduced to U.S. consumers. Not DVD player, DVDs themselves, the actual DVD. So DVDs were introduced to U.S. consumers in March of 1997. So they had this new technology that was smaller, easier to store, really light, easy to ship. And so they decided to do a test. They sent a DVD through the mail to one of their houses. They had great success, and they decided to move forward, creating the world's first online DVD rental via the mail. So they originally started their business with an offering of 925 titles, which at that time literally represented almost every movie title available on DVD. And they had a small staff, about 30 people, and they used Blockbuster's rental model for their pricing and due date structure. So they took someone who was kind of the top in the industry, they looked at what they were doing, what they were charging, and said, you know what, you can't go wrong, let's just go with that. The monthly subscription concept part of their business was launched in September of 1999, and this model offered a flat fee for unlimited rentals with no due dates, late fees, or shipping charges. So I believe when I got into Netflix, I started when they were doing the unlimited rental model. That was when I first got my subscription to Netflix so long ago. In the year 2000, Netflix had a subscriber base of 300,000 people. But it was operating at a loss of about $57 million a year. And a lot of their money, their lost revenue, was in shipping fees. They were shipping through USPS. So Blockbuster at this time, they see an opportunity. They see these two guys have started something that has potential, but is losing money. And Blockbuster has a lot of money, and so they see an opportunity. They offer to buy Netflix for $50 million. And their proposal included renaming Netflix to Blockbuster.com. Blockbuster would oversee the online business, and they would take care of providing all the DVDs. And the other component of Blockbuster's proposal was that they wouldn't all go through the mail. So people would have the option to pick their DVDs up in store and drop them back off in store. Now, that would kind of remove some of the dependency on the U.S. Postal Service, which would help cut some of those costs that were leading to that loss at the time. And the founders of Netflix were like, no go. They were committed to what they had started. And so they say no. And the very next year, they see this massive surge of growth in subscriptions. And so their business is on the way up. And then September 11th happens with the attack on the World Trade Center, which sends the economy and all of the U.S. into a tailspin. And then the other thing that happened in 2001 that affected them and kind of slowed their growth was the dot-com bubble burst. So all these dot-com companies, like themselves, the stock market valuations crashed. And so that impacted them greatly. At the time, they had a team of about 120 employees. They had to lay off a third of them just to try to keep the business operating. So you got these guys, they start this business, they're having a really rough go of it the first 5-6 years. And as I was kind of researching this and looking at the history, it occurred to me that it was as though fate really had a plan for Netflix. Because here they are, they're struggling. You have this massive terrorist attack on the U.S. You have this massive financial upheaval with the dot-com bubble burst. They're having to lay people off in 2001. And all of a sudden, November of 2001, right around Thanksgiving time, something happens in the country that they could not have known that helps get their business right back on track. And that is DVD players become more affordable. So here we are, the holiday season. DVD players now are at a price of around $200. It becomes the most popular Christmas item that year and sparks a massive surge in subscriptions in 2002. So Netflix is flying, and they decide to take their company public. at a price of $15 per share. So they go public May of 2002. And this is really good for them. It gets them the capital that they need to invest in their company. And they begin conceptualizing kind of the next phase of their business, which is offering movies online instead of via DVD. So it's 2005. They're coming up with this concept, and part of what's kind of creating a roadblock for them is at the time, the internet is still not where it is today, right? And so the data speeds and the bandwidth costs were really limiting when it comes to a business trying to upload large amounts of movie content onto the internet and stream that into people's homes. And so they didn't give up on it, though, because they figured, you know what, this is going to change at some point. And so they continued to work on this idea of offering movies online, and they go so far as to create like the hardware to do it. So they have this thing called the Netflix box, which would allow you to download the movie off the internet overnight, so it's sitting there ready for you the next day. Part of the reason they're doing that is that the bandwidth speeds and the data speeds of the internet lead to kind of a funky picture, right? It's not high def, and they're thinking people want to watch movies in high def. And so in 2005, something happens that makes them reconsider that, and that is YouTube. YouTube is seeing a lot of success with people streaming these videos off of the internet. And the founders of Netflix are seeing this. They're seeing that all these people are talking about YouTube, and the quality of the video is not that great on YouTube. And yet it's popular. So they figured, you know what, if people will watch YouTube, they'll watch movies. And they scrap their idea for the Netflix box, and they start putting 100% of their energy and thinking into their streaming concept instead. February 2007, they delivered their 1 billionth DVD, and they introduced video on demand, which initially was free to all of their subscribers. So if you were already subscribing to their DVD service, you could get video on demand service added at no additional charge. And this was good timing, because in 2006, the interest in DVDs begins to decline. And so Netflix, getting their streaming service online in 2007, they start to see their popularity increase. And part of what's leading people to choose Netflix is Netflix has done something very clever, which is they've installed in their programming a recommendation software. And that recommendation software was a system known as Cinematch. And this system kept subscribers engaged, because they would, watch a show, and then that Cinematch software would suggest to them other films that were slightly less rated, so more underrated movie titles, and then they would go and check out those underrated movie titles. And what would happen as a result is that movie title that wasn't really getting much viewers is now seeing more views. And so this not only helped Netflix because it kept people engaged with their service, but it also helped small studios see some success, because now this film that nobody was really paying attention to is getting a ton of views on this streaming platform, Netflix. So Netflix, since their inception, they've continued to look ahead, build, develop. How are they going after the next thing? And that kind of continues throughout their history. So in 2006, Netflix begins licensing and distributing independent films, right? We're not just going to stream the films. We're going to start paying for them and distributing them and getting them out there into the world and helping these independent filmmakers out. In April 2014, they had 50 million global subscribers with 32% of streaming market in the US and operated in 41 total countries. In 2016, they announced that they're going to expand their brand into 150 additional countries. By 2018, January, they had hit $1 billion in market capital, making it the largest digital media entertainment company in the world, larger than all the traditional entertainment companies like AT&T, Comcast, and Disney. They're just a massive juggernaut by the time we hit 2018. January of 2019, looking ahead, they apply for membership in the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America. And they're approved, and they become the first streaming site to join the MPAA. By year 2020, a year when the rest of the economy and a lot of businesses saw a lot of pain and closure due to the pandemic, Netflix added an additional 16 million new subscribers in 2020. As of right now, they have 203 million subscribers worldwide, 73 million in the US alone, and just continue to do phenomenal things with their movies that they're producing, their Netflix original series. I know that Netflix can be a little bit of a touchy subject for anyone like myself that works in the movie theater industry. But if you just look at what they're doing as a business, you can't hate on Netflix, man. So if you don't have Netflix, but you want access to their content, they have 3 basic plans. Or they have a 3-plan structure, I should say. So they have the basic, which is $8.99 a month, and the way they rate their plans is based on video streaming quality, because that's what they do, right? So at $8.99 a month, you get good video quality at about 480p, okay? Then you have standard membership. That's the membership platform that level that I have. It's $13.99 a month. You get better video streaming quality at 1080p. Okay? And then the other option is premium. It is $17.99 a month. You're going to get the best possible video streaming quality. It's going to come in 4K HDR. So if the video quality matters to you, and I think it matters to most people, you're gonna probably choose that mid-range. If you really you got a home theater and you want the full experience, then you're probably gonna go for the top tier. I don't know anybody that would go with the basic tier unless you tend to watch your movies on your phone or your computer, in which case might as well go with that cheaper one, right? Netflix, their user interface, super convenient. When you get to their homepage at the top, you have kind of their preview section where they preview a show or movie, and then you kind of scroll down and you have a continue watching category where it'll show you the things that you're currently kind of watching and give you the option to kind of quick find them and get right back into them. They have the My List feature where you can go through. I love this feature because as I find things randomly, I just click the check mark and it throws it into my list so I can go back and find it later really easily. Because I find things that sound remotely interesting, but I'm not interested in watching right now all the time when I flip through Netflix. So I, really use the My List feature a lot. There's trending in the US where they will give you shows and movies that are currently trending based on viewership. They will give you a list of the top 10 movies that day or week on Netflix, and then it breaks it down based on categories, comedies, originals, that kind of thing. And Netflix has a ton of original programming, that they produce throughout the year. I mean, I was absolutely stupefied during the pandemic when Hollywood studios were shut down, just how much new content Netflix managed to get out there consistently. It was like they never stopped. So that's Netflix. So we've now covered 2 of my streaming platforms, Paramount Plus, Netflix. We're going to take our first break. When we come back, we are going to talk about some of the wonderful cooking shows available on the Netflix streaming platform. See you after the break.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome back. You're listening to the GSMC television podcast with your host, Chad. Before the break, we were talking Netflix, specifically that streaming platform. And now we're going to talk about some of the content that's available on the Netflix streaming platform that I personally enjoy, and that's cooking shows. Now, a little story. There was a time where Food Network was my obsession. I watched the Food Network all the time. It was on my television in the background while I was doing work or cleaning or just hanging out in the house. It was the first channel I went to when I would sit down to watch something, and usually the last thing I would watch before bed at night. I could not get enough of the Food Network. I've since kind of let that obsession go. Still enjoy the Food Network. Don't watch it nearly as much as I used to. But I do enjoy occasionally checking out some of the food shows that are available on Netflix. One of the reasons I really enjoy cooking shows is, they've really kind of changed in a way. They've gone from just straightforward, some of them have gone from straightforward how to cook a particular dish type thing, which is what's very prevalent on the Food Network, to these more kind of travelogue, cultural explorations of food type approach. And I love that. Having been a military brat, getting to spend some time in Europe and travel, I love traveling. I love checking out new food, new cultures. That's my jam. And so the kind of newer format for cooking shows I enjoy. I also do enjoy the traditional competition cooking show. I've got one that I'll be talking about today with Crazy Delicious. I wanted to tackle some of the ones that are available on Netflix, because there's some things that Netflix does really, really well, and I think cooking shows is one of them. They also have a ton of stand-up comedy. If you're into stand-up comedy, I think they do wonderful things with stand-up comedy. But cooking shows, love them. So the first one I want to talk about today is a show called Ugly Delicious. This is Chef David Chang of Momofuku fame. His show, it first premiered February 23rd of 2018. There are 2 seasons available on Netflix. The second season is a really short season. First season has like 9 or 10 episodes, and the second season has like 5. Don't really know why they've done that. I did read online that his personal schedule with his restaurants, because David Chang doesn't just have Momofuku, he's got a whole kind of restaurant group with restaurants all over the country. And at the time that they were filming the second season, he was expecting his first child. So the guy was really busy. I imagine that probably factored into how many episodes of the show were filmed. But either way, 2 seasons available on Netflix for streaming now. I love the format of the show. So each episode focuses on a different food, and it looks at it from multiple angles. So it kind of takes a look at the culinary history of that food, the sociological and cultural impact of that food. And so say like, pizza, they'll look at all aspects of it. Where did it come from? How is it different from culture to culture, country to country? What's the impact of pizza on the people that make it, eat it, enjoy it? Like all of those things, right? And anybody who's knows anything about pizza knows people are very passionate about pizza. Chicagoans and their deep dish, which I cannot stand, but they love it. I'm much more of a thin crust kind of guy. I'm sure New York slice would be right up my alley. Haven't had one, but I'm sure it would be amazing because it doesn't have all that cheese like a Chicago deep dish, and that's what I don't like. Or that weird crust. Very strange. Anyway, so they'll kind of take that item and they look at it from all these different angles, and it's really kind of cool because it's not just a chef talking about food. He enlists all of these other people from all different walks of life. So for instance, he'll bring in different chefs, different personalities in each episode. For the pizza episode, he had comedian Aziz Ansari, who's of Japanese heritage, in Japan, researching and discovering pizza in Japan and talking about that experience, which just adds to it. He did a taco episode in Los Angeles and had food writer and critic, music writer and food critic, Jonathan Gold. This was filmed prior to Jonathan Gold's passing, and they're going all over Los Angeles, and they're eating different tacos from, taco trucks and stands and sit-down restaurants, and talking about kind of that food and how it's influenced the culture. And it was just a wonderfully... the show is wonderfully informative, but it's really interesting in how it's filmed. The conversations are engaging, they're enlightening. At times, they get very, very raw. So the season 2, episode 1, focuses on kids' food. Kids' menu is the title of the episode. And they start the show with this incredibly raw conversation that David Chang is having about finding out that he's going to be a father, and how what that was like to let the parents know that they were going to be grandparents. And he shows video of his immigrant parents as he's telling them that they're going to have a grandchild, and just the joy, just weeping with joy and pride they're going to have a grandchild. And he's weeping. In fact, there's a very kind of touching moment where they're not interviewing, or the camera's not focused on David, but it's actually focused on his wife, Grace, I believe is her name. And she's talking about how impacted David is because he's scared. David is petrified that he is going to screw this up, that he's going to be a horrible father, and he's been very open about it. He talks about how usually he finds success in effing things up. So he jacks it up royally, but through that comes success, right? And he's like, I can't fail my way into being a parent, because if I do, I could really jack up someone's life, specifically my child. So he's like petrified. And there's this beautiful moment where the camera's focused on Grace, and she's talking about how scared he is and how she knows that he will be a better father than he thinks he's going to be. And that there's been a lot of crying. That he has cried a lot. And they continue this wonderful kind of episode with them going over to David's parents' house, and his mother is teaching Grace how to make a Korean, because they're Korean, a Korean egg custard. A simple, easy thing that she can make to feed the baby. And his mother talks about how she's been sick with cancer for 24 years. She's been battling cancer. And they kind of talk about her story, her battle with cancer briefly. And she ends that with just so much joy, talking about how lucky she is to be alive to see her grandchild. You know, her and her husband were alive to see our grandchild. And just so much joy. It's just beautiful to watch. And this is kind of how every episode is. They're having these real conversations. They're talking about real things, and they're doing it in the context of food, which I think really gets to what makes me so passionate about food. Is just, this ability for food to bring people together, and to transcend a lot of the biases and problems and differences that we tend to, allow to overtake things in life. I think that shows like this, if people can watch them and experience them and really be impacted by them, are just tremendously helpful to helping reshape worldviews on an individual level. And so can't say enough good things about the show. Season 2, episode 1 kind of continues as David Chang is talking to other chefs with kids. And these are big name chefs with restaurants and very busy people, and talking about how they find that balance. But he also looks at school lunches, and he compares the school lunch program in a country like Japan to the school lunch program in America. And does so not in a necessarily a judgmental way, but in a let's present what's currently happening, right? And then you make your own determination, okay? And then the episode ends with David Chang trying to create a kid-friendly meal, because this is a chef. This guy doesn't do kids, right? He doesn't have a kids menu at Momofuku, right? And so you see him kind of working through this thing that he's going to have to do soon for his own kid. Ugly Delicious, 2 seasons available on Netflix. cannot say enough good things about this show. Highly recommend checking it out. We are going to take our next break. When we come back, we are going to talk chef show, Crazy Delicious, and a new food show for kids that I have fallen in love with called Waffles and Mochi. Stick around.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. You're listening to the GSMC television podcast with your host Chad, and we are talking Netflix and Netflix cooking shows. Before the break, I talked about one of my favorite cooking shows on Netflix, or food shows on Netflix, Ugly Delicious. And now we're going to move on to another one that I've enjoyed called The Chef Show. The Chef Show premiered on June 7th, 2019, and it was inspired by the 2014 film Chef. There are 2 seasons available for streaming on Netflix, and this show is produced by Jon Favreau, and he is the writer, director, and star of the movie Chef. And to help him along with this show, he brought in his friend, Chef Roy Choi. In 2014, when Jon Favreau was going to begin filming the movie Chef, he brought in Roy Choi as a consultant to try to make sure that all of the food scenes in the film were done like for real, like respectfully. So Roy Choi came in and they talked about food scenes in movies and television and what bothered them about them and how they could make Chef different. Roy literally taught Jon how to cook like a chef, how to, all of the different movements and how you hold the knife and all of those things, so that when Jon was doing it on screen, it was realistic. Chef, if you're a foodie, is a great film. Highly recommend checking it out. But the film was very popular, and there were several kind of food items in the show. Like there's this riff on the classic spaghetti aglio olio, which is spaghetti with olive oil, garlic, and red pepper. It's kind of a traditional classic Italian dish, and in the film Chef, they kind of do a riff on it that adds Parmigiano Reggiano and lemon to the mix. And parsley in there. And so that was a really popular dish that, kind of trended on social media and the whole 9 yards. And so Jon decided to create this show, and it features Jon Favreau and Roy Choi as they experiment with their favorite recipes, as well as techniques for cooking, baking, and they do this while collaborating with other chefs as well. This is a fun show. The introduction in the opening credits is literally like a food truck that says The Chef Show on it, and it's traveling down the road, and it's kind of like this claymation landscape. And the food truck is significant because in the movie Chef, Jon Favreau kind of finds his passion for cooking, or rediscovers, I should say, his passion for cooking by opening his own food truck. And so that is kind of this prominent imagery in the opening sequence of the Chef Show. And it's all kind of claymation, and this claymation food truck comes back, claymation style food truck comes back throughout the episode as they introduce different dishes that they're making, where you're kind of like in the food truck and it's rumbling down the road, kind of bouncing on this rough road, and things inside the truck are bouncing around, and you'll have like a dish. It's a completed dish on the table, and all of a sudden it'll bounce up into the air and all of the ingredients separate, and you'll see the name of the dish on the bottom, and then next to each ingredient that's magically separated out from the main dish, or the completed dish rather, it tells you what that ingredient is. And then they go through and they make it. One of the things that's nice is John has had some training from Roy, and he's continued to cook, at home since making the movie, but he's not a professional chef. And so to see them kind of working together in the kitchen, you have Roy, this very comfortable, experienced chef, and John, who's a little bit more novice, working together is really kind of nice. In fact, in one of the episodes, excuse me, they make some of the dishes from the movie Chef. They do a berries and cream, and they do their take on the spaghetti aglio olio, and you've got these pans going with olive oil and this really thinly sliced garlic, and John is like nervous. He's nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs that this garlic is getting overcooked, and Roy's like, "We're good. No, we're good." Just keeps kind of reassuring him that no, the garlic's fine. It just is a really kind of fun show to watch. The recipes are available online. It's I haven't cooked anything from this show. I enjoy it more for just kind of passive entertainment. I throw it on, I watch a couple episodes, I turn it off, and move on with my life. And then when I'm feeling like just chillaxing, I throw some more on. I like John and Roy together, and then when they're talking to others, a lot of times they're pulling in celebrity guests. So sometimes those guests are chefs, sometimes they're actors. So like there's an episode where they go to Robert Rodriguez's home. He's the director of movies like From Dusk Till Dawn, Shark Boy and Lava Girl in 3D, woot, and many, many, many others. But they go to his house, and he prepares a meal, and they sit and they eat and they talk and they drink, and it's fun. And again, it's another show that's talking about food culture, how it impacts that guest's life, and I think that is interesting. I just enjoy shows like that. So Chef Show, available on Netflix, 2 seasons. You can stream it now. All right. I want to move on and talk about a show that is so dedicated to the theme. It is just magnificent. And that is Crazy Delicious. Crazy Delicious is a cooking competition show on Netflix. It is a Netflix original show produced for British television that premiered on the 24th of June in 2020. So it's a British cooking competition. And basically they take home chefs and they bring them to an edible Garden of Eden. Oh yes, you heard that right. An edible Garden of Eden. The show has a heaven theme. Like literally, it's a biblical themed cooking competition. I watched it just because I was like, huh? Okay. So basically, these home chefs are brought in to the edible Garden of Eden. And the host, Jade Adams, this wonderfully pleasant, ethereal, red-headed host with all of her kind of Bible puns and fun banter with the inanimate objects of the garden, just leads them on this culinary competition journey, which is judged by 3 gods, represented by Carla Hall, Heston Blumenthal, and Nicholas Exted. And literally, the gods, the judges, are seated in this elevated seating area, kind of overlooking the competition space. And they wear all white. White suits for the men, white dress for Miss Carla. And they wait there to be presented with the dish that the cooks have made, and then proceed to provide them with their critique and thoughts. And then at the end they give judgment, and the winner of the competition receives the golden apple as a prize. Really interesting show. What I think I like about it the most is the commitment to the theme. I mean to tell you, it is committed to this theme, right down to having this like ominous kind of lightning that comes from the sky, this thunder roll right before the gods give their final judgment. It's like really cheesy, but lots and lots of fun. The set itself is absolutely beautiful. You've not seen anything like it on any cooking show you've ever seen before. And it is literally an edible garden. So before each of the 3 parts of the competition begin, the chefs are told, or the home cooks rather, the competitors are told to go forth and forage. And they literally go with a basket in hand, and they walk through the garden as they gather up the theme ingredient. In the case of the first phase of the competition, as well as any accompanying things that they need. So the episode I was watching, the theme ingredient was apples, and you see them going through the garden, literally picking apples, cutting herbs that have been laid in the edible Garden of Eden, like grasses. There's mushrooms and edible moss and just all of this stuff. And then every now and then they'll have a shot coming back from break or right before a new segment of the competition where there's like a little rabbit sitting in the garden, or just really cute and very interesting way to gather the ingredients. It's not a wall of refrigerators and metal shelves, metro racks full of spices. It's everything is in this garden, and presented in this really elegant, beautiful way that allows the viewer to really get engrossed in this show. The competition has 3 rounds, so you have all 3 of the competitors in the first 2 rounds, and then after the second round, 1 competitor is eliminated, and the final round is a head-to-head battle between 2 of the cooks. And they kind of work through, so it's a theme ingredient. And then it's the next round is kind of a reinterpretation of a classic dish. So a dish like spaghetti bolognese, and the cooks have to kind of reinvent that dish and its presentation to present to the gods. And then the third round is kind of the final feast kind of thing, almost like a Last Supper kind of deal, where they have to come up with this kind of larger extravaganza for the gods to partake in. Each section is time-based, so the first 2 are 2 hours for the chefs to kind of work, or the home cooks to work through the competition process, and then the third round is a 4-hour time frame that they have to work, and each round a different god comes down from on high to mingle with the people and kind of check in and see what they're planning, and talk with them a little bit, and sometimes give them a little advice here and there. It's a really fun show. Crazy Delicious on Netflix. I highly recommend checking it out. I have found it quite interesting and fun to watch. All right, guys, we are going to take our last break. When we come back, we are going to talk about the new children's food show, Waffles and Mochi. You don't want to miss it. See you after the break.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. You're listening to the GSMC Television Podcast with your host, Chad. We are talking food shows on Netflix. Before the break, I talked about Crazy Delicious, a competition, a Bible-themed competition food show on Netflix. And now we're going to end the show with a brand new one called Waffles and Mochi. So, kids and food has always been an interesting thing for me. I find that kids have a far more kind of diverse interest in food than people sometimes give them credit for. It's all just kind of a matter, in my opinion, of what they're exposed to early on, and kind of how the parents approach food. My way of exampling this is, if parents don't like natto, which is like a slimy fermented bean paste, fermented soybeans, then you're less likely to give that to your child to try, and therefore they may not ever try it, or try it until they're an adult, and then that will impact potentially whether or not they like natto. I use natto as an example because if you go to Japan, kids are eating natto all the time. And yet American parents aren't running out and giving their kids natto in the morning for breakfast, right? This show is one that I had kind of heard some buzz about. And the reason it got on my radar is people were talking about it because Michelle Obama is in the show. Like, she's stars in the show. And I was like, what? Michelle Obama has a cooking show? Like, how does that work? And then I checked it out and realized this is not a cooking show. This is a food show for kids. It is like you take Sesame Street and what Sesame Street has done for kids' reading and education and put it in a food show. That's what this is. Everything about this show is styled for children and their enjoyment and their education, and this show is fantastic. No matter how young or how old your kids are, I believe that they will enjoy Waffles and Mochi. It's a Netflix series. It's marketed as a food adventure. And it very much is. It's in partnership with the PHA, which is the Partnership for Healthier America. It's a group that works to improve nutrition and healthy food education for kids. In fact, there is a website for the PHA. It's wafflesandmochi.org, I believe, that allows you to earn badges as you work with your kids to make the dishes that are featured on the show. So just a really cool way to engage with your kids, to get them excited about food, and do it in kind of a gamified way where they're getting badges. And the really cool thing about this is in the show, at the end of the show, Waffles and Mochi receive badges for their work, and that'll make sense in a moment. The show kind of combines a travel show and a children's education program. And it follows these two characters, Waffles and Mochi. And those Waffles and Mochi are puppets. So Waffles is like this kind of, you don't really know what Waffles is. It's a little puppet, and he's got, or it's got, because it's not really clear, male, female, or other. It just kind of is, and has waffles for ears and a waffle on its sweater, and he's kind of like the lead. And then you've got Mochi, his fun sidekick and friend, who's literally a ball of mochi ice cream with a face. Little pink ball of mochi ice cream with a face that kind of talks like that. It's really, really cute. Very cute puppets. And they were living in the freezer section and eating ice cubes all their life. They don't know what food is, and they find themselves all of a sudden out of the freezer section and into the world. And there's so much to learn and so much to explore and discover, especially when it comes to food, because they've never had food that had taste and flavor. They've only had this like cold ice cube existence. And so they go to this food place, the supermarket, and they want to get a job. And so they have to go and they have to talk to Mrs. O. And Mrs. O is Michelle Obama, who hangs out with another puppet, a bee puppet called Busy Bee. And they are up on the roof of the market in the rooftop garden, and they are tending to the vegetables and other produce that's in the rooftop garden. And Waffles and Mochi go to talk to Mrs. O about getting a job, and she gives them an assignment. And their assignment in the first episode is that they need to go out and they need to find and gather tomatoes for her chef friend Massimo, who's going to need them to make a dish. But they can't just gather tomatoes. They have to learn about tomatoes along the way. And so Waffles and Mochi, they get into a magical shopping cart, which flies off into the air and takes them on this adventure. And they go to Italy, where they meet with Massimo, and they begin to learn about tomatoes, because specifically part of the challenge that Mrs. O has given them is they need to find out whether tomatoes are a fruit or a vegetable. Because in order to do their job, they're going to need to stock the tomatoes in the market, and they need to know what section of the market to put them in. And so they go off, and along the way, they're meeting with different people, and they're collecting different types of tomatoes, cherry tomatoes and large heirloom tomatoes, and so on and so forth. And they're trying different dishes made with tomatoes. And each person that they encounter, each chef or personality they encounter, they ask them, well, is it a fruit or a vegetable? And then they're told, what it is. So the first chef they encounter, a wonderful chef whose name escapes me, but she's got a great food show called Salt, Fire, Fat, and something else on Netflix. I'll do an episode about it. Sorry, I don't have it in my notes. But anyway, so they meet with her, and she says it's a fruit. It's a fruit because it has seeds, and anything with seeds inside of it is a fruit. And so she teaches them how to make candy with tomatoes, and takes these cherry tomatoes, and she seasons them. It's her, and she's got a little girl that's helping her, along with Mochi and Waffles. And she sets Waffles on grating Parmesan cheese, and he's just grating away. And then the chef and the young girl are marinating these cherry tomatoes and putting them into the oven, where they're kind of cooking them down, so that they bring out that natural sweetness. And she keeps referring to these tomatoes as candy, and they make this wonderful dish of tortellini stuffed pasta with tortellini that was made by Chef Massimo, that the Waffles and Mochi had gotten when they met with him. And they make this wonderful pasta dish with these beautiful fresh tomato candies that they've made, and they taste it, and it's so good. And then Waffles and Mochi thank her, and they go off, and they're walking down kind of a city street, and they see a sign for a pizza place, and it's got tomatoes on it. And Waffles is like, "Hey, let's go in there and check it out." And Mochi's like, "Can we?" And he's like, "Of course we can. It'll be research." And they go in, and they meet a young lady sitting at the counter, and the young lady begins to have a conversation with them. Only she's having that conversation using sign language. And you find, I'm getting choked up, literally. Talking about this show chokes me up. It is such a wonderfully, wonderfully, wonderfully done show. So Waffles and Mochi are talking to this young lady, and she's signing to them while talking. And Waffles kind of eventually says, what are you doing with your hands? And she explains, I'm talking with my hands, and I'm doing that because everyone that works in this restaurant is deaf. And she teaches Waffles and Mochi what it means to be deaf, and how deaf people communicate with their hands. And they have this nice interaction where they get to try a margarita pizza, and which features the tomatoes, and they talk to some of the employees, and the young lady at the counter kind of points out how wonderful it is or magical it is that the people that work in the restaurant, they talk with their hands, but they also create the food with their hands, as a way of kind of saying that they're communicating in multiple different ways, all using their hands. Just so wonderful a message. Wonderful message. And then, of course, as they do, they ask the young lady, is tomato a fruit or a vegetable? And she says it's a vegetable because that's how it's used by chefs. And this, of course, confuses Waffles and Mochi, who thought it was a fruit. And so they thank her, and they get back in their magic shopping cart, and they go to their next destination, which is to talk to Chef Jose Andres. And they meet him in his kitchen, and he talks to them about tomatoes, and he's asked, is it a fruit or a vegetable? Because Waffles and Mochi are very confused, and he says it's both. Because it has the seeds on the inside like a fruit, but it's used like a vegetable in all kinds of dishes, and he makes them gazpacho, using these fresh tomatoes, so that they can taste this other tomato dish. And then, armed with this knowledge, Waffles and Mochi believe they've got what they need to know what to do with these tomatoes and report back to Mrs. O. And they hop into their magic shopping cart. They go back to the market, and they go to put the tomato away, and they kind of have this back and forth. It's a fruit, it's a tomato, or it's a fruit, it's a vegetable, it's a fruit, it's a vegetable. And so then they kind of deliberate a little bit, and Waffles comes up with an idea. And they go upstairs to the roof to meet with Mrs. O and report out on their adventure and what they've learned. And they say they figured out where to put it. And she says, well, where did you put it? And they said, everywhere. And then you see the grocery store downstairs, and there's literally tomatoes all over the grocery store, on the canned goods, on top of the eggs, everywhere. And they're like, because you can use it in everything, so we put them everywhere. And Michelle's like, not really what I was thinking, but okay, great, and at the end, because of everything that they learned and the work that they've done, not only do they get the job at the grocery store, at the market, but they also get a badge. And Michelle Obama presents them with this badge because whenever you do something good or you learn something new, you receive a badge. And the badge is a little tomato. It's fabric. It reminds me of like any Girl Scout badge that you've ever seen on their little vest. And so Waffles and Mochi get their tomato badge on their official market apron that they wear as part of their uniform, and you see them kind of all proud wearing their aprons with their new badges on it, and the episode ends. This show, I cannot say enough good things about it. It is produced by Higher Ground, the production company that Barack and Michelle started, and it focuses on kind of the messages that they've worked so hard to tout. Mrs. O is kind of acts as like the voice of wisdom, always ends each episode with the statement that family comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors. The messages are meant to be inclusive and educational and informative and fun, and everything about this show is just that. The theme song leading in to the show talks about eating your parents and listening to your vegetables. It's just phenomenal. I cannot say enough good things about this show. And If you have kids, you absolutely should check it out. If you don't have kids, I encourage you to check it out. Right now, with everything that's going on in the world, I think having shows like this that strive to put positive ideas and content out there for kids about something as important as food and nutrition is just so incredible. Again, if you can't tell, I love this show. So I'm going to stop talking about it now. You guys go out, check it out. It is well worth the watch.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.
And please remember to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the social medias. Would really appreciate that. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.